Okay, good evening, everybody. I'm going to take a roll real quick. I'm still trying to learn all the names. All right, Jake. Sadie. Cameron. Alyssa. Holly. Lionel. Caroline. Miles. Tyler. Coraline. Kylie. Jakeem. Logan. Lisa. Mallory. Brianna. Cameron. Graceland. Devontae. Julia Sancho. Cullen. And Jake. Okay. All right. Very good. So how was your last week been? You guys getting back, your lives getting back to normal, sort of? Sort of. The insurance industry is a mess. It is a disaster down here. I know people who have been through 3 adjusters. I had a State Farm, some adjusters for State Farm. Well, they're not State Farm adjusters, but they're the private adjusters. Came out to my townhome here last Tuesday, spent 2 hours, took measurements, took pictures, blah, blah, blah. Said they'd be back to me within 2 days. Monday afternoon, this other adjuster calls me and says, I just got to Louisiana and I've been assigned 100 cases because one of the adjusters got COVID and the other one got in a car accident and they just bailed. And then I'm finally talking to friends of mine, acquaintances, that it's a big problem. These adjusters come down and they're overworked or for whatever reason, they just leave. It's a big mess. So I don't know if you guys are having similar issues, but hopefully that'll be solved at some point. So, but that's like, if you don't mind traveling and doing work when there was a disaster, an insurance adjuster is a pretty good job, but you do have to travel a lot. So, and then, the other thing, we were talking, somehow we got on the topic of the vaccine last class, the COVID vaccine. So then I got this email forwarded to me from the dean. I just wanted to tell you guys this, if you haven't seen that email, to register for your classes next semester, you have to either be vaccinated. I don't know when the process of dropping is going to happen, but at some point before the spring semester, you'll see the date. But you have to either be vaccinated or show a medical reason or write a philosophical statement. So it sounds like if you really have strong feelings about not getting vaccinated, they're not going to give you a hassle. You just would write out this philosophical statement. But make sure that you do that. Check your emails and make sure you do all that before the date so you don't get dropped. They ended up kicking some people out of LSU. Up there, like 78 people or something, because they just never did anything. But if you get the vaccine, it will be in the system. And so that's all you have to do is get the vaccine. You don't want to get the vaccine, you got to provide some kind of statement. So it's really kind of a hassle than just like this. And then I happened to be in New Orleans last weekend. Have any of you been down to New Orleans since all this COVID stuff happened? What was your impression of New Orleans?
Just went for Halloween.
There's nobody there. And I was asking my husband, we think it's because of the Saints. We were down there, the Saints were playing out of town. But I was down there a couple weeks ago too, and there's no one in New Orleans. And it's all these restaurants are closed. And I was even listening to it on the radio. Like this one person who works down in the CBD is actually going home for lunch because all these restaurants on Poydras are closed. And it's because they can't find employees. They can't get, they can't find anybody to work, waiters, dishwashers, cooks, what have you. And then, so I was listening to this when I was driving into campus on Monday. Then I flipped the channel to CNBC. I have Sirius Radio, so I can get these news stations. Flipped it over to CNBC, and then they're talking about the shortages on the shelves. There's a shortage of toilet paper again, shortage of paper supplies, shortage of this, that, and the other thing. The reason is because they can't hire people to unload the containers. They can't hire people to be truck drivers. And so it basically comes down to, which we'll be talking about tonight, stimulus money. People have money and they're not, having money is a real motivation killer for working. When they run out of money, they're going to go to work. But on CNBC, they were joking and saying people are staying home playing video games. As you know, as crazy as that sounds, there's a segment of the population that has enough money from stimulus payments and unemployment, and they're just staying at home and gaming.
I do know some people were making, actually, when they got the stimulus is more than what they were actually making it with the job. So I'm guessing they're still relying on that money to.
Right. So, yeah, and there's still stimulus out there, I guess. I mean, because my uncle got some stimulus a couple of weeks ago. I thought that was over, but evidently not. There's still stimulus out there for some people. So, but if you get an email saying that you have stimulus money and to click on something from the IRS.gov, that's obviously a scam because I got that yesterday. I know I'm not entitled to any stimulus money, and it just said IRS.gov. You're entitled, your third stimulus check is on its way, or click here. So it was a real sophisticated looking scam out there. So be aware of that. So anyway, I wanted to talk to you about tell you about the vaccine. Oh, where I was going with this trip to New Orleans was if you go to Orleans Parish, they're requiring a vaccine card to get into any bars or restaurants. That's another reason why nobody's there, I think, because we went into a restaurant and they made us we had to show a vaccine card. And so it was there were 4 of us. We took another couple down there. And so I have my vaccine card, but we lost my husband's. And so I just said, well, our friends had theirs. And I was telling the host, I said, well, I can get on my email and try to go to myashner.org and look his up and blah, blah, blah. And the guy just got disgusted. He figured 3 out of 4 was okay and he let us go sit down. But anyway, if you go to Orleans Parish, they're not happy about having to do it either. But you either have to show a test within 72 hours, you've got to show this vaccine card, or you can download this LA wallet thing where it's on there, which I haven't, I downloaded it, but I haven't filled that out yet. You have to sign in. So anyway, that's what's going on in Orleans Parish. Okay, so today we're gonna talk about, we're going over the chapter 2 homework. Then we're going to finish the book. And like you guys have probably figured out by now, I usually end up not getting as far along as I think I'm going to, but we definitely will. We should hopefully finish this book tonight. If we do, we'll be on track. We're ahead of schedule. So we'll try to finish the book tonight. Next Monday, you have 2 problem sets due. Problem sets 3 and 4. They're a little bit shorter, so we'll finish that book. And so then next week, we'll go over the homework, have a review for the exam, and then talk. We'll start the next book probably a little ahead of schedule, even though you're not going to be tested on that in this test. We'll start that material, and then I also, if I have time, I want to talk about your companies. So right now, all you really should be doing, all you really need to do at this point is just be reading about the companies, be reading about your firms, and just be thinking about the big picture regarding your firms. You know, how is the economy affecting your firm out in your industry? And so we'll talk about. I have access to I have a Schwab account, and I have access to some information from research information. And so what I usually do, just to kind of help you guys get you started, is I'm going to print that for each of your companies and give it to you, and we'll talk about it. So you'll get some idea of what they're thinking about regarding some of the risks facing the firm. Okay, so anyway, let's go ahead and get started with chapter 2, or the homework assignment 2 rather. See if I can. Okay, so what is for number 1, chapter 9, they talk about the disappearing middle class. What's the real story behind, we talked about this last week, what's the real story behind the disappearing middle class?
Middle class is disappearing because the middle class is getting more money, becoming a higher class faster than what a lower class can build up the gap, basically.
Right.
So middle
Right.
class is getting richer.
Yeah, or you could say that, yeah, the lower class people are not moving up to fill the gap. And another way to say it, or another way to look at it is, you have more people moving up and out of the middle class at the top end than who are falling below on the bottom end. And so that's what the statistics show. And so, have you guys taken the stats? Have you taken stats yet? Some of you may know, yes. Okay. Well, I don't know if it's mentioned in the stats class that you took, but you can use statistics to lie or to kind of fudge things. And you can be using accurate statistics, but you can just pick statistics to make your point. And so, well, I'll give you a real simple example. Years ago, this is I used to teach undergrad statistics, and I taught the grad statistics for a while too. And in the undergrad book that I had, they illustrated this by talking about a basketball strike. The NBA had a couple strikes, this is probably 15 years ago, 10 to 15 years ago, they had a strike. And so they were mentioning 2 articles in the paper. One article was pro the NBA players, one was against them. And so the pro NBA player one was saying the median income of the NBA is, at the time it was like $432,000 or something. The median income is $400 and some thousand. When you consider an athlete that has a limited career, that's really not that much money. That's the median. They should be striking, was the point there. Then the other article was saying it's a bunch of spoiled basketball players making millions of dollars. The average salary is $1.5 million. Okay, so both of those statistics were right, but they were picking and choosing, because why would the median be 400,000 and yet the average be $1.5 million? What's the difference between the median and the average? Or the median and the mean? Yes?
The average is typically going to be a lot higher than the median. And
Yeah.
especially when you have like big outliers, like people that are getting like multi-million dollar contracts, and you're averaging out with people that are making 400,000.
Yeah, the 400,000, I think it was like 432,000. That was the standard salary that the majority of the players make. So the median is the middle. The average, of course, we add everything up and divide by the number. So if you have really high, so a few of these athletes, typically always have a few athletes that are making multi-million dollars, they're driving the average up. So that's why when you see statistics for wages or housing prices, wages or income, median income per zip code or per city or state, you'll see they always use the median number because of you have a few wealthy people who will make the average go up. So anyway, the point I was making with all this is you've probably figured out by now too that this book is a little conservative. They kind of, they go on into the conservative side. So of course they're going to mention this. We've read it for years. We've read in the press that the middle class are disappearing. And then the next sentence, it talks about how the middle class is losing ground, the real wages are decreasing, blah, blah, blah. Well, that's true, but they neglect to mention the other statistic that shows that there's a large number of the middle class that are moving up and out. So anyway, that's what that was about. Okay, so number 2, summarize the discussion on inequality from chapter 10. Are the rich getting richer? And if so, what factors are driving this? Okay, so what did you put about the first part? What is the situation on inequality? What did they mention there in chapter 10? Brianna, you have yours pulled up?
I said the rich are getting richer, but the poor are also getting richer as well. She said the rich are getting richer faster than the poor.
Okay, that's valid. And why are the rich getting richer faster than the poor?
They a lot of them have more talent, or some of them are more educated.
Or because, yes,
So I think in the book, it says that like it takes money to make money, like they're investing, things like that.
it's the power of compounding.
And usually the richer are those that are retired or older generation. So
Mhm. And we have a lot of older people. I mean, America is aging. The whole world is aging. I mean, Western Europe, you have aging populations in the industrialized nations. Because you have low birth rates and people are getting older. And we're going to see that. We're going to see how dramatic that is when we get to the chapter tonight on healthcare. And there's a statistic that shows that by 2035, 22% of Americans are going to be over 65. That's pretty crazy when you think about it. Almost 1 in 4 people will be over 65. I think it's by 2035. So that's pretty dramatic. Again, it's the baby boomers, and people are living longer and all that. So Brianna's right. We have our standard of living has risen as a result of increasing technology, increasing GDP through technology, and so that has enabled everybody. It's a rising tide raises all ships, so to speak. Everybody has a better a higher standard of living, but there still is this inequality. Okay, so are the rich getting richer, and if so, what factors are driving this? So we talked about that was in the notes and in the book. Aging population, okay. The big ones were aging population. What else, Logan?
Better education.
Yeah, better education. What else? Yeah, the changes in the tax code that had people switching from putting their income into their company versus personal. And then what was the other one?
Job, line of work, like more white collar, compared to blue collar.
Yeah, right. The manufacturing jobs have pretty much gone away in this country, so we have more white collar jobs, fewer blue collar jobs. So those are the main reasons those are some legitimate reasons for income inequality. Of course, there's diversity. There's racism. There's people who have access to opportunities. Who have access to good schools and have access to opportunities. Can have more. People who have access to good schools have more access to opportunities and so forth. So that stuff is there. We're not saying that it's not there. They're just talking about some legitimate reasons why it is. And so we talked in class that they found that one of the biggest factors, they don't mention this in the book, but one of their economists have been trying to figure out how can you reduce poverty? How can you eliminate poverty? And why are why do some people rise up and some people are still sliding in poverty? And they found neighborhoods to be one of the key drivers. If you're in a good neighborhood, you have access to good schools. That gives you greater opportunities. And so they've actually tried to subsidize people moving to better neighborhoods. And I was telling you about this article I read where that they really were getting a lot of pushback on that. Even when they were saying to somebody who was living in a low income neighborhood, look, we're going to subsidize you to go live in this better neighborhood. But that's hard for people because they're leaving their friends and family. And so it's, there's a lot of moving parts to something like that. It's not just that simple, just to say, oh, well, if everyone could live in a nice neighborhood, it would be fine. They also found grit, hard work to be a really big factor in whether people move up or not. So anyway, those are all reasons why that are driving. Well, it's not why those aren't reasons why the rich are getting richer so much, but it's just how to eliminate poverty. Those are some of the ways to do it. Okay, number 3, what is stagflation and why was the recovery from 2007 to 2009 so drawn out? So what is stagflation? Yes.
Rising inflation with little to no growth.
Right. So we don't have to worry. Yes. Do you have a question? Okay. We don't have to worry about, we haven't had to worry about that for years, but in the 70s we had stagflation, we had rising inflation, mainly because of with little to no growth. Mainly we had this inflation or had stagflation because of oil prices. OPEC was restricting supply of oil, so we had these rising oil prices, but really no growth at all, and so that's stagflation. And then they in that chapter they talk about the recovery. We talked about this in class too. Why was the recession so drawn out? Because remember, typically when you have a recession, you have a pretty quick turnaround, pretty quick recovery. So why was the recession so drawn out? What were some of the reasons? Colin?
You had an increase in the amount of unemployment benefits, incentives to get off welfare for weekend, lose standard eligibility, losing health insurance premiums were paid by the government. It's just a lot more government assistance that I guess didn't really motivate a lot of people to get out there and solve the growth even more.
Right. Economic behavior is all based on incentives. And so by giving those handouts, if you like, I mean, I really shouldn't say handouts, I just have to do a better work. I mean, I'm all for giving unemployment and food stamps to people in need. I have no problem with that personally, but the problem is certain people are going to take advantage of that. They're going to be incentivized not to work. So in trying to help the majority, you're always going to have a few who are going to take advantage of it. And so when you look at the statistics, if you lengthen the amount of the length of time of unemployment, people are going to take longer to get a job. I mean, if you think about just more recently, the last situation with the unemployment. So my daughter had this friend who was on unemployment, and during the COVID thing, and finally she couldn't stand it anymore. She went back to work, even though she was making more, on unemployment. She was single. She got a dog. She just couldn't stand being at home anymore. She went back to work. But then I'm on the radio show once a month, this little local radio station that we have, KTIB. Anyway, we were talking about that about a year ago. And the MC said, well, why would somebody want to stay home? Why do all these people want to stay home? Blah, blah, blah. And I said, well, if you think about it, if you had kids at home, if you had children and you could make more money staying home with your kids than going to work, that's a really big incentive to stay home. And so they really screwed up when they just had a blanket thing where they're going to pay everybody in the US $600 more a week, because that was more than most people were making in Louisiana and Mississippi. We just incentivized people not to work. And so that's part of the problem now that we have. Our economy has rebounded because of all the stimulus money, but we really didn't need all that stimulus money, because if people would have been incentivized to go back to work sooner, we wouldn't have had to give them that money. And the way the money was given out anyway, that's a whole nother story. You can't just willy-nilly give people money, because why were they giving retired people stimulus money? Why were they giving people who had jobs, still had jobs, stimulus money? It's just, it was crazy the way it all came down. But anyway, there's all that, all those reasons, the reasons that coincided, that's why the recovery was so elongated. Because there was really no incentive to go back to work. All right, how is unemployment defined? Okay, so what is the definition of unemployment? Cameron Moses, where's Cameron? Okay, how would you define unemployment?
The defined as being like 16 or older, seeking employment.
Right, so if you're between 16 and 65, if you're in the labor pool, you're not in a hospital or a prison, and you're 16 to 65, and you're actively seeking work, you're unemployed and you're actively seeking work, you're defined as being unemployed. And so we have so many people who have fallen off the radar and who aren't actively seeking work. And so that's why our unemployment rate is really lower than it should be. So the unemployment rate during the Great Depression, I think that's in the book, they tell you it was like 24 or 25%, but they think it was actually only about 17%, because they didn't count people who were working in all these government jobs. They had what's called the WPA, and they had these massive government programs to put people back to work. And so if we include all those people, it was really down to around 17%. So what do you think the true rate of unemployment is today? Did any of you look online and I know someone texted me about yes.
It's between 8 and 9%.
Today?
Okay.
It is 8 or 9 today?
Clear around growing 10%.
Okay, I have looked recently. I thought it might be lower than that. So, okay. That means it's probably around 13%. They're saying 8 to 9. So I think so it'll be interesting to see. I think maybe this week is when I think it's the first Thursday of the month that the unemployment rates come out. So it'll be interesting to see if they go down or up after that. So anyway, so that's unemployment. Okay, the gig economy. What is its actual size, and what are the advantages and disadvantages of working in the gig economy or full-time for a corporate employer? So what did you put about the gig economy? What were your thoughts about that? Did anybody look at how big the gig economy was? Yes.
I think I found something that said it's believed to be between 20 and 30% of the individuals in the U.S. and Europe participated in this outside of their nation.
So 20 to 30 people are doing it on the side,
20
basically.
to 30% individuals.
That's a lot. Yeah, that's a lot. Did you get any stats on who's doing it full time?
No.
Okay.
I found that in 20, it's expected in 2021 for the gig economy to be worth $347 billion.
Yeah, it's really,
It's huge.
it is huge. So I found something and I put a link up here. Let me, hang on, let me pull this up for you all. Okay, so this is a study. This is a case study that was done in January, came out in January about the gig economy. And basically, here's the general definition. Free market system in which organizations and independent workers engage in short-term work arrangements. And so here it is, 347 billion. in 2021 is the estimated size of the gig economy. And by 2023, they think it's going to be 455 billion. That's a year over a compound annual growth rate of over 17%. They think the gig economy is growing at 17%. So I thought this was interesting. Most of these workers in the gig economy are not making a lot of money. The average hourly rate charged is $21 an hour, with just a few people, well, 20% of them saying they're making over 100,000, but the majority of them are not making much money. And I thought this was really interesting too. 80% of these freelancers in the US say it would be difficult for them to meet an unexpected expense of $1,000. So that's pretty scary. This is interesting too. 45% of these full-time gig economy workers have high anxiety about their stability, which I would too if I worked in that field, if I was a gig economy worker, versus 24% of traditional employees. 54% of them have no access to employer-based benefits. So you might be able to certainly make some money in the gig economy, but if it's your sole support, that's pretty scary. I mean, that's not a real secure future. I couldn't do that personally. I could do it on the side, but I wouldn't want that to be my main source of income. So 347 billion in the gig economy. And this is interesting. This shows you what the majority of these gig economy workers are doing. So basically 60% of it almost is Uber and Lyft. So the majority of, when we talk about these gig economy, these freelance workers, it's not like high-tech graphic designers and all this. I mean, although that's there, a lot of high-tech stuff is there, but it's mostly drivers. The majority, almost 60% are drivers. The next highest, 30%, that's Airbnb people renting out their homes and such. And so then you've got Airbnb and VRBO is the next one. And then the next is handmade goods and services, miscellaneous stuff, and then finally professional services. So, these are the people I would suspect that are making the most money, probably, but it's the fewest number. So you can look through this if you have a chance. But if you, and so if you think about the two biggest areas here, asset sharing, meaning Airbnb, and ride sharing, those were the two things that had the biggest impact, that were impacted the most because of COVID. So again, it goes down, it shows how precarious your situation is if that's your sole support. Anyway, I thought there's some interesting stats here. See if there's something else here. Oh, this is interesting. Here's the demographics. If it's your primary source of income or your secondary source of income. And so African American, 55% of the gig economy, full-time gig economy, African American. Whereas for the part-time, the highest percentage is white. I thought that was pretty interesting. And then, as you would expect, the full-time, the highest number is with younger people. And then with part-time, the highest percentage was older people. Oh wait, no, it was older. Well, not, yeah, see 50 for part-time, the highest percentage is 55 and 55 above, but that was interesting too. So anyway, interesting stats there. So anyway, you can look at that. That's on Moodle if you want to look at that in more detail. Okay, now I lost the. Come on. Okay, now I lost the homework, but I'm not going to pull it up again. Okay, so that was the gig economy. Okay, the problem 6 was compare and contrast America. Well, this is kind of relates back to number 2, but compare and contrast America today versus 1960. Have we even made a dent in eradicating poverty? So what do they talk about when they compare the 1960s to today's? They throw out a number, then they throw out a percentage. So what do they say there?
Most people are living in poverty, but the proportion is different because the population is greater today.
It was the same amount of people. It was 40 million and 40 million, but it's a less of a percentage. Right. Yeah, exactly. And then they go on to say that, poverty in the 60s was a lot different than poverty today because you have all these safety nets. When they do these poverty measures, they don't take into account these in-kind payments, these transfer payments, welfare, food stamps, subsidized housing, WIC, all kinds of stuff. And so that we have all those in place. And so that actually has raised people's standards of living. And I think also, if you are homeless, there's some kind of weird rule, and we all pay for this on our cell phone bill. There's some kind of weird rule where they think it's a right for people to have cell phones as a result of an emergency. And so you'll see homeless people walking around with cell phones. Anyway, that you can get on at these homeless shelters, I have heard. So that's just my point is, the poverty today is not what it used to be. So that's the point of that. Okay, define inflation versus deflation. Which one is generally considered worse by economists? Okay, so what is inflation? Simply rising prices. Inflation is when prices are falling. Anytime we have a recession, well, we're at risk for deflation. So deflation means when prices are lower, prices are falling, but they do consider deflation to be worse because it means lowering prices can also mean lower wages. And so that's why it's considered worse, because wages can go down. Also, a lot of people's retirement plans, government retirement plans, Social Security, they're tied to the cost of living indices. And so if we have deflation, theoretically, they could go down. Those benefits could go down. They usually don't do that, but they could. All right. Define nominal versus real in terms of income and prices. Okay, so what's nominal income versus real income? What in general, what does nominal versus real mean? Anybody?
Nominal is like the price in dollars, like the dollar amount, and then real would be like the sacrifice you would have to give up really to get the food.
No. Okay, nominal is the price in dollars, yes.
And real is determined by taking nominal minus inflation.
Yeah, so nominal is the stated price. The real price is if you take inflation out. So if you're paying if you're paying $100 for a TV, let's say a small TV, you pay $100, and then inflation is 2%, it's going to be $102 next year, but the real price is really only $100. So when you think about income, nominal income is what you're making, but your real income is what you're after you back out inflation. And so that's why you'll see some statistics where they'll say, like, for the middle class and for the working class, the real income really hasn't gone up very much because of inflation. But that's really not the case, for the past few years because inflation's been pretty low and real wages have risen. But whenever you hear real wages, they're talking about wages before inflation, the real price of this and that. So anything that says nominal, that's the current price. Anything that's real is going to factor out inflation. All right. So let me show you. This is also, I want to talk about this last week and I didn't have a chance to pull this up. There it is. Hang on a second. So down here in the section of these articles for discussion, this is the real price of gasoline. So you don't hear too much about the price of gas anymore because it's been the price of gas has been cheap for a long time. But people always will complain about the price of gas. You know, the price of gas is going up or it's gone down or whatever. Well, why do you think that people focus so much on the price of gas and complain about the price of gas when it starts to go up? Teresa?
Well, because that's something that we all use daily, and seeing it, it's mandatory.
Yeah, we all have to use it, and we all have to buy gas, and if we're struggling and we have to go spend 30, if we were spending $25 and we're spending 45, or that's happened before, where the price of gas has gone way up, we notice it. But when you think, so I wanted to pull this up for you to show you that the real price of gas has actually stayed the same pretty much for the last century. It's actually, and in some ways has gone down. So this is the historical price of gas from 1929 through 2015. So look at this. Okay, so this is the current, this is the nominal price. This is what the nominal price of gas has been up to 2015. So it started out, it was 30 cents a gallon forever. Okay, so back from the 1920s through the 1970s, you could literally pull up to a gas station, and those were the days when nobody had even heard of pumping their own gas. You could pull up to a gas station and you could say, give me $1 worth of gas. And you could get 3 gallons for $1. Or you could say, I'll take $3 worth of gas. And you could get 9 gallons for $3. And so I can remember my parents doing that. And so I remember when this whole thing started with the self-serve, because Arco, they don't have Atlantic Richfield out here, but in California they had Atlantic Richfield was an oil company. They're called Arco stations. And so they made this big deal that if you drove up to the pump and pumped your own gas, you would save 3 cents a gallon. So then everybody followed suit. And then before you knew it, you couldn't find anyone to pump your gas anymore. Everyone just is doing it themselves, and it's self-serve. So anyway, that's how that all happened. So anyway, here's the real price. It goes from 30 cents, and then by the mid 70s is up to 50 cents. Now this was the so-called oil crisis, which was really the whole thing was basically fake. There was no oil crisis. It's because OPEC got together and restricted the supply. So you can ask your parents are probably too young to remember this, but you can ask your grandparents or maybe an older aunt and uncle what was going on here. So think about the shock of the real price going from 60 cents in the late 70s, and by 1982 we're paying $1.25. So the price of gas doubled. This was when I was in high school and college. The price of gas doubled. Everybody was talking about how expensive gas was. It was crazy. People were buying diesel trucks diesel cars. You remember that, Teresa?
Kind of, yeah, my
Kind of.
parents talk about
So-
it, and, yeah.
Yeah, people were buying diesels because diesel fuel was cheaper and it burned more. And I can remember my high school geometry teacher, I grew up in San Diego, it's close to Tijuana. And so he was talking about how he bought this diesel truck and he added an extra tank to his diesel truck. And he would drive down to Tijuana, Mexico, to fill up his truck and drive back. That's how crazy it was. So anyway, then it comes down because what happened was the OPEC, the oil cartel, they couldn't keep it together. They started trying to cheat each other and then the whole thing fell apart. So then prices come back down. And then they've steadily, since 2004, they were really cheap. They've gone up and down and so forth. Okay, but so that's the nominal price. Now let's look at the real price. Well, look, back then, the real price was actually $2.60. It gradually decreases. And then the real price, when you factor out inflation, this is in 2015 dollars. Here it's below $2, goes up to $3, comes back down. And then it's gone kind of crazy here. But so you can see that with the exception of this, the real price of gas hasn't changed all that much. It's fluctuated between $1.50 and $3.50 for pretty much for the whole time.
Now that we are now consistent with what gas prices are supposed to be, or you think they're gonna try to keep it the same? Now following that the graph?
I think so, but this is what they do though. When gas prices go down, then they see it as an opportunity to raise the taxes. And that happened in California. If you go out to California, you're gonna pay about almost $1 more in gas than you're paying here because of taxes. And the last time prices went really low, in California, they raised the taxes on gas again. So, but I think they'll try to, keep them low. We might see a little spike because of the hurricane. Because oil has gone up a little bit as a result of the hurricane, what's going on in the Gulf and so forth. So anyway, so that's just explaining the nominal versus the real. It's interesting to look at the gas prices. So the last part of this question 8 was cite some examples of products whose quality has improved over time in such a way that it does not actually reflect the current prices, even just for inflation. In other words, what are some products that when you adjust for inflation, the prices haven't really gone up at all, or maybe are cheaper? Yes, Dave.
I find TVs.
Yes,
Like,
TVs.
I find TVs are honestly very cheap for how much we rely on.
They're really cheap, really cheap. Any electronics are really cheap. So I'll tell you this real interesting story. My husband had this great aunt who lived in New Orleans. She lived on West End Boulevard. You didn't know where West End Boulevard is in New Orleans? It's by the canal. It's by the canal that flooded after Katrina. And so I had to go through her stuff. She was in her 80s when she passed away. She passed away at 89 and she never threw anything away. And so I was down in the bottom. A lot of those houses in New Orleans and the lakefront, people live on the second story and the first story is just storage and stuff. So I'm going through her stuff and I see this huge piece of furniture. It's like this wooden thing that's like this high. It's a radio, okay? So I open it up and it's a radio from the 1930s. And the invoice is still there. Her father had bought this radio in the 1930s, paid $1,600 for this radio and was paying on it on time. Imagine that much money, paying that much money for a radio in the 1930s. Well, let's go back. If you think back to history, that was the computer of the day. The radio was the first piece of electronics really ever. I mean, the radio is what brought people out of the dark ages, so to speak, as far as it brought the world inside to them. So these radios were super expensive. So what you're saying about the TVs are true. I mean, when TVs first came out, they were super expensive. they've gradually gone down. I mean, you can go now, you can get a 35-inch television, smart TV for what? $100, $200, super cheap. So you're right, electronics have really gone down. And so I remember my parents, this is the other thing about baby boomers. They can do math in their head really quickly. Why is that? They never had calculators or computers. And I can remember when I was like in junior high, and my mother got this adding machine. It was like the first calculator. It was a Hewlett Packard little calculator. It was $200 and some. It was crazy. You can get a calculator now for $10. So as technology has increased, yeah, all electronics, of course, are much cheaper. So what about cars? People like to talk about how expensive cars are. Sanji, or Colin, what's your impression of, any thoughts on these vehicles?
Yeah, I think even though like the price of the car has kind of stayed the same, and it's not maybe got cheaper, like not like the actual numbers, they obviously got more expensive, but I guess with inflation added, it's kind of, been around the same.
Yeah, cars, well, I mean, I have to run the numbers, but you're right. The price of cars, the nominal price of cars, the real price of cars hasn't really gone up. A Chevy Malibu, I remember this because my parents bought a Chevy Malibu, and Chevy Malibus used to be really cool cars. They're not anymore. I mean, they used to be muscle cars, but I can remember the night, like 1974, my parents buying a Chevy Malibu, they paid $2,500 for it. So just think about that. The mid-70s, your typical family car, $2,500, $3,000. Fast forward today, that same car is probably about 25,000, 25,000. If you round the numbers, the future value of that, with inflation at 3%, it's probably the same.
So I found that in 1908, a Model T was $825, and today that's about $24,000.
Okay, so there you go. But think about how basic a Model T was. This is the other side of it. And they mention this in the book. When you think about all the improvements, the value of that car, the real price is actually, real price today is much lower. Because if you think about a Model T versus today, same price, but we're driving something much safer, much more advanced than a Model T now. But I mean, there's some, well, what are some of the unintended consequences though of having these high-tech cars? I mean, they're safer, they have all these bells and whistles,
They
but
break a lot of people.
some things can.
They're hard to fix.
Yeah, you can't work on it, go ahead.
Basically the same thing, like you change up one little like chip or something and try to put it back together.
You have to remove the whole engine to get to the ones.
Or just the situation that we're in at the moment, like vehicles are just kind of had a halt because there are, a shortage of chips.
Yeah,
So
Right.
one little thing
yeah,
and everything just,
yeah, they're too techy for their own good. So let me just give you this piece of advice. Learn how to get into your car the manual way. Because I went on a trip, forgot where, I must have been at a conference or something. I went on a trip to this conference, got into New Orleans about 11:45 at night and drove home. Okay, that was all fine. That's not the relevant part of the story. The very next day, I go to try to get into my car and I can't get into my car. And so I'm thinking, what if I would have been at the airport, 11:45 at night, my husband wouldn't answer the phone, plus he's 60 miles away, we knew it would have been no help anyway. I would have been stuck there. So anyway, the long story gets short, short story of that is, the battery on my thing was just dead, but it never gave me a message that the battery on my key fob was dead. And I didn't have any way to figure out how to open the key fob because my manual's in the car and the car's locked. And so anyway, what you have to do with my car, I have a Volkswagen, on the handle, you have to pull off this little painted thing, pull off this plastic thing, open the key fob to get the key out, which is a huge hassle if you haven't done it before, figure that out. Put the key in there, and then once you're in the car, you have to press the key against this little space by the steering wheel and press the button to start the car. So I had to actually call somebody to get that all figured out. And the way I got the car open was my husband had an extra key. So anyway, my point is that these high-tech cars can really be a problem for you when the batteries go dead in them, or the batteries in your key fob goes dead. If the battery goes dead, then you can't just push start a car like you could in the old days. And anyway, and also these push button starts or the fact that you don't have to have your key in the ignition, they're causing a huge increase in car thefts and carjackings in the city, in New Orleans, because people are leaving their keys in the car. And then like this one guy, for example, they actually got it on video. He pulled up to have his car worked on. He just left the keys in the car, gets out of the car and goes in, and these two guys pulled up, and one of them starts to steal his car. And he came out and tackled them. It was kind of dramatic. But anyway, but on the bright side, there are cars do work longer. They're more expensive if they break, but they're lower maintenance than they used to be for sure. But all this stuff is going to end up going breaking. That's expensive. All this computer stuff and everything.
A lot of people won't be able to like work on it themselves anymore. Like that's the more computers they have inside of it and everything. So that's another thing that I mean, it's good for a dealership,
But even that, like for us, we had a part we had to repair with my car. We ordered the part online and went to Walmart to get them repaired. Walmart cannot use the part that we bought. You have to buy theirs
Oh,
to get
really?
it. Yeah, it's
Oh, that's stupid, because they won't cover it probably. Yeah.
I mean, we would have paid for their service, yes.
Yeah.
But it's like, why spend another $30 to $80 on a product that you already have?
Mhm.
So it's like,
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, you see all these classic cars around, especially like if you ever, I don't know if you guys have ever been to this, but in October, the first week in October, they have cruising on the coast in Mississippi, which is really cool because of all these people with these classic cars. So I always think, those cars are really easy to work on. Are we gonna see, what's it gonna be like in 50 years or so? Well, we'll probably all be driving electric cars, but with all these cars with all this computer stuff, what's gonna happen in 50 to 75 years? Will they be classics? Will people be able to work on them? I read an article today that in Denmark, maybe by next year, they won't be making gas cars anymore. Gas combustible engines anymore. So we're going towards electric cars.
My dad worked at a Chevrolet dealership in Houma, and he went to a meeting with like Cadillac, and when they came out with a new line of cars, and they usually last about like 4 or 5 years before they come out with a new one. They said their next one is going to be, they're all going to be electric. Cadillac's going to be electric after that.
I would love to talk.
That's crazy, but
I think that's crazy too. I would love to talk to a Tesla owner right now who lives in this area and ask him how he's fared during Hurricane Ida. He or she. Because you can't really,
I know our power grids really can't support like a ton of like Teslas in the same neighborhood and stuff like that.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
They said if they have like more than like 3 or 4 on a block, like the infrastructure is not there
Okay.
for the charging stations.
so there'd be a surge.
Yeah.
The family across from us has one, and I'm not sure how, but they got it installed sort of like in their home. But so but
Yeah, the charging thing.
yeah.
Yeah, you can get it installed. My son-in-law was talking about he put solar panels up in their house. And he was talking about some kind of battery. It's some kind of a battery that's on the wall where the solar panels charge the battery, and then you can charge your electric car that way. So that, I mean, that can make sense if you have a hurricane. But we're not in, I mean, we don't have the infrastructure right now to support all these electric cars. And then when with gas cheap, there's really not an incentive, I think, to buy an electric car. When gas is so cheap anyway, it's still relatively expensive. We shall see what happens with the whole electric vehicle situation. Okay, any comments or questions on the homework? All right, let's take a 10-minute break and then we will continue with the rest of the material.
Usually like this, the mail slower than usual. I like brown. My dad was-
Oh, really?
Yeah, but I like brown. I used to have like
All right. You ready?
in the movie, like,
Nobody would not comment. I wouldn't sit in Walmart on the insurance.
I found this super interesting article this afternoon. Remember when we were talking about it's a chapter on GDP, and at the end of that chapter, they were talking about some things that they should add to GDP and some things that they should subtract to GDP. And they mentioned in there, should you subtract out pollution? Because that, that's a negativity on GDP. So if you're producing, let's say you live along the Mississippi River, you're producing all this great stuff, but you're polluting the environment, you're polluting the neighborhoods. Should you subtract that out of GDP? And so the conclusion in the book was basically what? You remember that? Anybody? No, the conclusion was no, you shouldn't do it because it's too hard to measure that. So this is a study that came out, and actually this study is a couple years old, but for some reason it hit the news wires yesterday. And so they're talking about basically natural resources, and should we give a value to these natural resources? And so they have valued a whale at worth $2 million. So let me tell you how they arrived at this. This is pretty interesting. So, and they think that you should add the value of nature to GDP or subtract it out if these species are becoming extinct or there's fewer of them. Anyway, so whales live long lives, as you know, and they sequester carbon dioxide in their bodies. Okay. When a whale dies, obviously it sinks to the bottom of the ocean. It's still holding all this CO2, all this carbon dioxide. So they're saying that one of these mammals is responsible for pulling 33 tons of heat trapping carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere for centuries. So they're helping to prevent global warming in a way. And if you kill off, and if there's fewer whales through our, because of our advancements in technology and so forth, if there's fewer whales, then that's affecting GDP. So they're saying that a whale should be worth $2 million towards GDP. Anyway, this is a long article, but you can read it if you're interested. It's really interesting because they're talking about just what they were talking about in the book. We're constantly increasing our productivity, but there's a cost associated. Their claim is there's a cost associated with that because we're depleting natural resources. And should we take this into account? they think we should, but it's, it comes back to the same conclusion in the book. How do you measure all this stuff? It really is, I think it's really difficult to measure. And then at the end of the chapter, or at the end of the article rather, they talk about investment returns. And okay, so we're told to expect, or we generally, the historical return in the stock market has been 12%. This all kind of ties together with productivity. Companies are efficient, profitable, and productive. People are productive. There's increasing technology. Stocks are paying dividends. Their value's increasing. That translates back to a 12 to 15% annual return in the market. And so they're just saying that at some point there's going to be extreme weather or higher insurance costs, and that, you know, this isn't really, they're saying that this isn't really realistic to think in the long run because of these negative externalities, if you will. Now, and so this all reminded me of some economic theory that I've read, and through history, a lot of economists will say that a society, a lot of the demise of various societies has been because they outlived their resources. For example, they think the decline of the Mayan civilization was because they had some wars. They had a period of when they were warring with other peoples. They had a drought, which they also had a lot of successive droughts, so the food supply was gone. But they think that the overpopulation had depleted the resources. So a lot of ancient peoples will come into an area, their food's plentiful, population goes up, then they exhaust the resources and they die off. So if you think about that theory, some of these doomsdayist economists think that eventually, will the human race eventually end because we deplete our resources? Or will our quality of life eventually go down because we deplete our resources? I have the answer for you, and the answer is no. This is why. And this is what they're not seeing here in this article either. I see this as a doomsdayist article too, because of technology. Technology will allow us to, advances in technology should allow us to continue producing enough food and continue to survive, so to speak. And if you just think about the electric vehicles, we're not going to be dependent on fossil fuels forever. We already have substitutes to fossil fuels. You might ask yourself, well, why are we still even using fossil fuels? We don't have to. But it's a political thing too. It's hard to change. Of course, the energy industry doesn't want us to not use fossil fuels. To me, getting back to the electric argument, to me, it would make more sense to have a hydrogen car that runs on water. You could pull up to a gas station and instead of buying gas, fill it with hydrogen. So anyway, the point I'm making here is, this is a really interesting article that I posted. I don't think that's realistic to include nature because you can't really measure it or quantify it. And also it's really doomsdayist because technological advancements will enable us to not outlive our resources, so to speak. So, but I thought that it kind of caught my eye. A whale's worth $2 million. And I had no idea that whales absorb all this CO2. So that's up on Moodle if you want to take a look at that. All right, let me pull up the rest of the notes here. Okay, so we went up through, I think we left off at 14 or so. Let me see. Okay, we talked about that. 15. Okay. Okay, this was, I didn't really have an assignment, this assigned in the second homework, but this was included in that second homework section. But basically, they're talking about inflation and the debt bond. That's one of the chapters. So what they're getting at here is that eventually we can't just keep spending. And lowering taxes or keeping taxes the same. Eventually, we're gonna have to pay the piper, so to speak. Eventually, we're gonna have to raise taxes. And so that's what they talk about here, that eventually higher, that this increase in spending is gonna cause inflation, which it kind of is right now, but the Federal Reserve is trying to keep inflation in check. But eventually we're gonna see higher taxes, which is another reason if you have some money to invest, or if you're trying to invest in the long run, it's another reason to open up a Roth IRA. If you have some money to invest. So why would I mention a Roth IRA in relation to taxes as a cushion against higher taxes? Yes.
So you put it to a Roth, it's your post-tax income, so it's not taxed when you pull it out.
Yeah, exactly. So a traditional IRA, an IRA is an individual retirement account. That isn't a special account where you open this IRA and you just put it in a bank somewhere and you're earning 1 or 2 or 3%. An IRA is just the way the account is categorized. You can go online to Charles Schwab, you can go to Fidelity. Robinhood doesn't have IRAs yet, but they will at some point. But any brokerage account, E-Trade, StockTrade, go to Vanguard mutual fund companies. So you can go to any of these brokerage houses online and you can open up, just tell them I'm going to open up an IRA. You can do it online. You don't have to talk to anybody. You can put up to $6,000 a year in an IRA. So let's say you open up an IRA and you're saving $50 a month, you just automatically transfer it, or $100 a month. Well, with a Roth IRA, you're putting it in with after-tax dollars. In other words, you don't get a tax break. A traditional IRA, when you put the money in, you get a deduction at the end of the year when you do your taxes. So if you save $1,200 when you do your taxes in a traditional IRA, you would get to reduce your taxable income by $1,200. But it's taxed when you take it out. When you take the distributions out, you're going to be taxed. The whole idea behind the traditional IRA was that when we retire, we're going to be in a lower tax bracket. That's when we'll pay our taxes, when we take this money out. But what this is telling us is that that's probably not going to happen. We might be in a higher tax bracket by the time we retire, especially if you're successful and you've got a lot of money saved. So the Roth IRA is an awesome investment, an awesome vehicle, because you don't get a tax break right now. You're putting it in with after-tax dollars, but the earnings are never taxed. So the article with the whale, the $2 billion whale, which was showing those annual returns of 12 to 15% on the stock market. Imagine earning 12 to 15% on this money. You're never taxed on it. And then when you take it out, you're still not taxed. So if we're facing higher taxes, it makes even more sense to start saving money with a Roth IRA. So if you're interested in actually doing that, I can talk to you about it and give you some more information about that, because I teach a personal financial planning class. So I'm kind of passionate about getting people to start saving when they're done, because if you're 20 and you start saving if you saved $150 a month from age 20 to 65, you're a millionaire. Easily, you're a millionaire, easily. And that's just $150 a month for the rest of your life. Now or for your working life. Now this is a really cool thing about a Roth IRA too. You can take the money out whenever you want. The contributions that you put in, if you need the money for some reason, you could take it out with no penalty because you never got the tax break. tax dollars. So anyway, that's a good way to invest. That's kind of a sidebar thing. So this is just talking about our increased debt that we have and how it's going to end up increasing our taxes at some point. Okay, we talked about the nominal versus real. We can skip that. Okay, now we're into the next section. Okay, the Affordable Care Act, Obamacare or the Affordable Care Act. So when I talk to people from other countries who come here to visit, they just can't believe that we don't have subsidized medicine. That, people are walking around without health care, without insurance and so forth. So here's kind of a different take on that than you've heard in the media. So some of you are probably too young to remember this, but way back when Obama was president, it was a big deal to have this affordable, because one of his big deals was to put in place basically socialized medicine. It wasn't new. That actually was started way back when Nixon was president. They should have implemented it then. It would have been a heck of a lot cheaper. They were trying to put in some kind of subsidized medicine program, subsidized insurance when Nixon was president. Never happened. Then you fast forward to the late 80s, early 90s, when I guess it was early 90s when Clinton was elected. And his big thing was to have an Affordable Care Act. They didn't call it that. His mistake was he put his wife Hillary in charge of it. And the reason I say that is not because Hillary isn't capable. She was very capable. But there was all this resentment because it's just like when Trump was elected and he had his kids working with him or working for him. You don't put your family in, if you're elected president, you don't put your family in charge of the various things. And so people really resented that he put her in charge of working on this subsidized, socialized medicine, and it just never happened. So anyway, fast forward to the Obama era, and they put this in place. So, and the reason, they were selling it to us by telling us there's millions of people who need insurance and don't have access to insurance. And it's a terrible situation in this country. But here's the statistics. So look at this. Look at some of these statistics here. They were saying that 15% of Americans lacked healthcare coverage. That translated to 45 million people. 18 of those 45 million, 18 million were age 18 to 24. Out of this 18 million, so this is the part that I wanted to mention to you. Out of this 18 million, 12 million were eligible for publicly available health care, but chose not to take it because they didn't want to pay the premiums. So here's the whole problem, is that there is definitely a need out there for people who need health care and couldn't get it. But you had a lot of young people who just don't want to pay for health care. They could buy insurance if they wanted, or they could get affordable health care, but they'll pay. I'm not picking on the millennials, anybody, if they think they're healthy enough, they're willing to pay $120 a month for a cell phone, but they don't want to pay $100 for health insurance because they just figure I'm not sick. If I get sick, I'll just go to the emergency room and have to be treated. And so that was a big problem. So anyway, the point that they're making here is that 15% of Americans lacked health care, but only 3% of Americans couldn't get health care. The rest of them just were choosing not to buy health care. And so the Obamacare thing really turned out to be a disaster. So why was it such a disaster? It still is. And what were some of the problems with it? They just didn't think through. Again, they didn't think about the incentives. People should have been incentivized to buy that insurance, right? To buy the affordable health care, but people weren't. Why was that? Yes.
Penalize people for not being on it?
Well, they were penalizing people for not being on it, but some people said, I'd rather pay the penalty. It would be cheaper for me to pay the penalty than pay the premium. And so for insurance to work, when you think about health insurance, so when they thought of Obamacare, for any insurance to work, you have to have a pool of people, right? You have to have a pool of people with the majority not using it. So you've got this pool of people paying in, and then you have some people, who are using it. And so they look at the pool and they base the rates based on that. And so when the people who were developing the Affordable Health Care Act looked at this pool, they figured, well, X amount of people are going to be in the affordable health care system, and this is what the rates are going to be. Well, what happened was all the old and sick people got into the system. A lot of people who were young and healthy did not get into the system. And so you had what we call a death spiral in the insurance industry, where you have all these claims and they're losing money until they keep raising the rates, and then pretty soon all you have left is older and sick people. So that's one of the problems is they were trying to force people to get into the plan, but they couldn't, and not enough people joined up. And then you have these insurance companies who are dropping out. So there's a couple things with Obamacare that I think was a good thing that they did in a way, although it has raised our premiums. They now allow people to be on their parents' policy up to age 26, where before they were dropping off. If you were out of college, I think it was 18, or it was 21 if you were in college. But now you can, regardless of what your situation, even if you're married, until you're 26, you can be on your folks' policy. So that's a help. And then they can't deny you for pre-existing conditions. So they used to, if you got insurance and you had these pre-existing conditions, they might deny you, or they would charge you, they would deny these pre-existing conditions coverages. So let's say I changed insurance companies and I had some kind of cancer the year before. Well, like for the next 4 years, they wouldn't cover that specific issue. And so now they can't do that. They have to, the law makes these insurance companies take you regardless of your pre-existing conditions. So that has raised all of our rates, but it's allowed people more coverage. So those are some of the good things I think that came out of the Affordable Health Care Act, but there are some issues with it. And my advice to you is when you turn 26 and go off your folks policy, if you don't have an employer sponsored plan by then I would look into the Affordable Health Care Act, but I would also just call a Blue Cross Blue Shield agent. There's one in Metairie that I found for my daughter before she got when she needed insurance. And just if you're young and you're healthy, just consider getting a high deductible policy, because all you really need is a catastrophic policy. If you get sick or something, you just go to the doctor, pay cash. But if something catastrophic happens, you got insurance, and it would be, the premiums will be much lower. Because I'm hearing real horror stories about the Affordable Health Care Act. If you are lower income, if you're a student or lower income, the rates are pretty good. But if you make a higher income, the rates can be pretty high and the penalties can be high, from what I'm hearing. So anyway, just do your homework if you're looking for that. My mother had a friend who was retired, and he wasn't on Medicare yet. Anyway, long story short, his CP, he was paying like $1,100 or something a month, or $800 a month for insurance. And so his CPA, his accountant, says you should go get on one of these exchanges and get on the go with the Affordable Health Care Act. So he does this to save on insurance. Well, then the next year he gets hit with this huge penalty because he made too much money. He had all this dividend income because his investments did so well, and because his income went up, then he had to pay this huge penalty. So he would have been better off just staying with his private policy. So anyway, I don't want to go into a bunch of details on the Affordable Health Care Act. In the book, they, I don't even, let me see if this new edition even has, hang on, which chapter was this? it is chapter 17 still. But it's kind of, the stuff that we're talking about there, in there is a little bit dated as far as the actual current regulations. So what I wanted to focus on really was some of the statistics as to why healthcare costs are so expensive in this country. Because are they, well, let me ask you this, are the drug companies taking advantage of us? Is the pharmaceutical industry taking advantage of us? Maybe, I mean, some of them are. Remember the EpiPen thing where the EpiPen was thousands of dollars? So there are some instances, I think, where that's the case. But you also have to realize these pharmaceutical companies, they might do research and development on 100 drugs, and only 2 or 3 actually end up being approved and going to market. And they spend so much money on research and development that they really do need a long period when they need the patent protection of this long period. I think it's 20 years to recoup their investment. And they're in business. I mean, they're publicly held companies, they're in business to make a profit. So if we do go to totally socialized medicine, we're not going to see a lot of this research and development, a lot of these really great new drugs and procedures as a result, because there's not going to be the incentive to do that. And that's why a lot of these new drugs come from the US and so forth. So yeah, there is some price gouging, if you will, there's some issues, but there's a lot of legitimate reasons why healthcare costs are high in this country compared to countries with socialized medicine. So let's look at them. So 50 years ago, 6% of annual income was spent on healthcare. Okay, today, 17% of our national income is spent on healthcare. So that's pretty dramatic. Let's look and see why. And of course, costs have gone up. You know, companies are charging more, but there are some legitimate reasons too. So let's look at this. Okay, well, number one, aging population. Old people use the healthcare. Older people are the users of healthcare. So, you know, if any of you have had, you know, grandparents or great grandparents, you know, older people in your family that have seen the end stages of life, and my dog's vet described this to me and my husband, and it's true for people too. He basically was saying for animals and people, imagine a marble on a table. You're going along just fine. This marble's on a table, everything's good. And then all of a sudden, the marble just drops off. You have, you know, and you die basically. So think about that as healthcare. You're going along and your health is fine. And then you're getting old, and then something catastrophic, you get cancer or whatever, something catastrophic can happen, and then your health declines. And so that's kind of what happens to most people as they get older. So the top 5 users incur more than 50% of all healthcare costs. And so, for example, my father died of multiple myeloma. Never sick a day in his life, never used the healthcare system. And then the last 5 years of his life ran up probably over $1 million in healthcare costs between the chemotherapy and all this stuff. And that brings up another issue, because I was talking to this doctor when my dad was going through this, and he said, you know, if I was told that I had cancer, I would tell my doctor, I want a couple of vials of heroin or morphine, not heroin. They won't give you more heroin. But he said, I would take a couple of vials of morphine and I'd go down to Grand Isle with a fishing hole and I'd go out like that. So, and that there's something to be said to that, because I saw my dad suffer, and many of you have seen people with cancer. What's the quality of life, you know? And all through the whole thing, they were asking my dad, they'll ask the patient, do you want to continue with chemotherapy or do you want to not do it? And so there's a whole, of course, there's a whole industry in keeping people alive and prolonging people's lives, because of course it's generating money. If he didn't have insurance, they probably wouldn't have been so readily willing to give him all this expensive chemotherapy. So anyway, the point was I making with, what I was making with that is, that's a classic example of at the end of your life, you spend all this money on healthcare. So that's why our costs are going up in this country, because we have an aging population. So this is what I was telling you earlier tonight. Right now, we have 13% of the population over 65. It's, but this could be a couple years old, but it's around 13%. By 2035, 22% over of our population is going to be over 65. So that's pretty dramatic increase there. We're going to see increased healthcare costs. They're going to have to do something with Medicare. Medicare is not in a good financial, is not fiscally sound. Those of you who don't know, Medicare is the government, basically government subsidized insurance for retired people. It's something we all pay into. When you pay your Social Security, when they take out for Social Security, they also take out for Medicare. You hear about Social Security, really being on shaky ground. Medicare is even worse. And so that's going to be, we're going to have to make some cuts to Medicare too, because the numbers just don't work. So anyway, that's one reason, aging population. Second reason, we don't limit the health, typically, we don't limit the healthcare spending on the elderly. In other countries that have socialized medicine, like Europe, England, Canada, Japan, they limit the healthcare for the elderly. So I had this one, I was talking to this one former student of mine, and he was in the Air Force, and he was stationed at Econ Air Force Base. That's in Fort Walton Beach, Florida, And his mother-in-law, his wife was from England. His mother-in-law was visiting, and he worked in the medical industry there at the base, and so at the hospital. And so she was complaining about some ailment in her shoulder or something. And so he says, "Well, just come on in when I go to work the next day. Just come on in and we'll check you out. Just let's see what's going on." So they diagnosed her. And she said, "Okay, when I get back to England, I'll really have it done." So anyway, she gets back to England, and she calls him up, and he says, "Did you have a surgery?" And she says, "No, I can't have that procedure. I'm too old. They won't do it." So when you have socialized medicine, they're going to do a cost benefit, and if it's not worth it, if they don't think the cost benefit is there, they're going to limit some of these more expensive procedures on older people. We don't do that. I mean, I think some doctors will do that here a little bit, but not to the magnitude that's done in these other countries. So that's another reason why our healthcare costs are higher. Also, think about technology. How has the healthcare industry changed? For those of you, some of you probably work in the healthcare industry. How has technology changed the healthcare industry just in the last 10, 20 years?
We have more robotic help, doing the fine details going in, stitching up organs that we would be very difficult to achieve years ago. But even the scans, new technology, new knowledge, as well as understanding how it all works.
Yeah, like for breast cancer, I was reading that the technology that they have now can find breast cancer so much earlier than before. It's almost to the point now, well, it is to the point now where some of these breast cancers that they're finding in older women, it's in such an early stage, it's basically cancer cells that haven't formed a tumor yet. And so I was reading a study that said if you do an autopsy, there was a study that did these autopsies on women, postmortem women, and the majority of these women had cancer cells in their breast. So the point is, are you over treating people now? Because you're catching stuff so early, but it may not ever become cancer. So anyway, that's a whole nother dilemma. But the point is,
Wouldn't it be cheaper though, in the long run?
to treat it,
To treat it, yeah.
if it were to develop,
Yeah.
yeah, it would. That's true. And that's the whole point of this, catching things earlier, you can treat them when it's cheaper. So, but yeah, there's all kinds, there's new equipment that's more expensive, new drugs that are more expensive, new technologies. And so it's all more expensive. And then you have what's called a moral hazard, which means when someone else pays for something, the demand is increased. Now, those of you who are in the medical industry, well, Teresa, can you explain to us what an HMO is? You don't know what an HMO is? Does anybody know what an HMO is? Health Maintenance Organization? That, an HMO is, probably most of you guys who have insurance have an HMO. And that's where you have to go to a specific doctor and you pay a copay. So back in the day, 30, 40 years ago, you had insurance, you would pick whoever you wanted to go to, you'd pay the deductible and you'd go to this doctor and you'd pay an annual deductible. Well, then they decided, let's to cut down on the costs, let's have a network of doctors where you can only pick a certain doctor in this network, and the doctors are going to accept a lower fee. And instead of paying your deductible, you're going to just pay a copay. So think about this now from an economic perspective. You get sick, you have a regular plan, and you have a $300 annual deductible. It's January. You haven't met your deductible. You've got this $300 deductible, and you're coming down with a cold or a flu, blah, blah, blah. Are you going to go to the doctor? I mean, if it gets bad enough, you will, but you're weighing the cost benefit there, right? If you're going to have to pay it out because you haven't paid this deductible. If you had it, what if you had an HMO plan and you only have a $25 copay? What would you do? Would you go to the doctor if you had the $25 copay? Yeah. Would you go to the doctor if you had a $300 deductible? It would depend on how sick you were, right? So the point is, this all backfired on them because they didn't have any economists in their little think tank when they were thinking this up, because they didn't think, oh, people are going to act on incentives. It's going to cause overuse. If I only have to pay $25 a copay, I'm going to go to the doctor whenever I have a hangout. So it didn't really save money overall because it caused overuse. So anyway, that's the moral hazard that we're talking about there. Okay, and then the final reason in the book, a legitimate reason, is because Americans are heavy. We're and it's not just Americans, but other cultures too, are basically any developed nation, any industrialized nation has problems with obesity. And a third of Americans are obese. So what does that mean? You have more health problems, type 2 diabetes and so forth. So those are some reasons why, some legitimate reasons why our healthcare costs have gone up. So it'll be interesting to see what happens with the Affordable Health Care Act. They haven't really talked about it at all. They talked about it a little bit, which when Biden was first elected, but have any of you heard anything about it's going there? It's just kind of off the radar now. So we'll see what happens with that. Okay, so this is, what chapter was this? This is 17. Okay, moving on to 18. Oh, this is a good one. Okay, so have you ever heard the saying, if somebody says something often enough, it's kind of like watching the news. If someone says something often enough, eventually people just start to believe it. Well, that's kind of how it is with who pays taxes in this country. The media continually says the rich do not pay taxes. And so people believe that the rich don't pay their fair share of taxes. And I was listening to somebody Monday morning talking about the tax issues in this country. And it was really interesting what he was saying, because he was saying that same thing, that the media continues to tell us that the rich don't pay their fair share of taxes. But the wealthy pay, like the wealthiest 2% of Americans, or 5%, I don't remember the exact statistic, but the wealthiest small amount of Americans, 2 to 5%, pay 90% of the taxes in this country. The wealthy are paying taxes. And what the rate is less is what it is. And what the wealthy are doing is they have money to to hire financial planners and to hire lawyers. And they're just trying to limit their taxes based on those current laws that are out there, the way that Congress designed it. And then the media tries to penalize it. So what I'm saying is they're trying to save taxes as much as they can. And they, you know, let me ask you this, why do you think a wealthier person, they're paying more taxes in real dollars, but why might a wealthier person be in a lower tax bracket than say I am? I mean, I work for Nichols, I'm making a good salary, but why might my tax rate be higher than somebody who's a millionaire? Huh? Yeah, capital gains or passive income. So if you look at the tax tables, the tax rate, the tax tables cap out at about 35% if you make over $200,000 or so. So you've got, so your taxes on your income, it's like 10, 15%, 20, 25, 28, and I'm not gonna pull up the tax tables and bore you with that, but it caps out, I think the top rate is 33 or 35%. That's on earned income. Most wealthy people they don't have jobs where they're making a salary. They might, but the bulk of their income is probably coming from investments. And the capital gains tax caps out at 15% for long-term capital gains. So if you're paying long-term capital gains tax on the investments that you have, you're only paying 15%. So you're paying more in taxes, but they use the statistics in a different way, and they say, oh, they don't talk about the rates. They'll say, oh, well, that wealthy person is paying less taxes than somebody who's not as wealthy, or someone who's working class. Like Warren Buffett. Warren Buffett's famous comment was, my secretary pays more in taxes than I do. Well, of course she does not pay more in taxes than he does, but her tax rate is higher because he's paying her a salary and he's got all this investment income. And also passive income is if you have, let's say you have rental income, you own all these rental properties, well, you're able to deduct all of your expenses against your rental income. And so you can try to bring that, the goal is to bring that down to zero. And so, you know, when they were, this whole thing with Trump not sharing his tax returns, I mean, I think he should have shared his tax returns. Every president before him shared his tax returns. It's not any big deal. So there was, I'm sure there's stuff that obviously he didn't want the American public to see. But, and who knows what'll happen with all that. I don't care anymore. But, you know, he also is paying people to reduce his tax bill down as much as he can. And he doesn't, he's really just a brand. Trump is just a brand. He doesn't really have a whole lot of money on paper when you think about it. So anyway, let's get talking about this. We have this, when you consider, after you consider deductions, exemptions, and credits and everything, well, we don't actually have exemptions anymore. The way our tax system works is the one positive thing that Trump did was he did simplify our tax code and he reduced our taxes. So now, if you're married filing jointly, you have a $25,000, I think it's like $25,500 standard deduction this year. If you're single, you have a $12,500 standard deduction. So what does that mean? If you're single and the standard deduction is $12,500, what does that mean for you tax wise?
Basically, that just like reduces your, well, it reduces your tax liability, you know. So
Yeah. So if you made $12,500 this year, taxable income, it washes out, and you're not paying any taxes at all, zero. If you have a child, you're going to get an earned income credit, and you're going to be making money at that level. So at the low working class levels, you're going to get a tax credit. The government's paying you money. Not only are you not paying taxes, but you're getting this credit, which is a dollar for dollar credit. So only 53% of Americans actually pay income tax in this country, because by the time you figure out all these deductions and the credits, only 53% are actually paying income tax. And we have this progressive tax system. That means that the tax rate increases the more you make. So for example, for your first, let me just show you this real quick because it will be easy for me to pull this up. Hang on a second. You'll understand it better if I pull this up. Just wait 1 sec here. This is a different class. This is the financial planning class, but this shows the tax rates. Okay, so take a look at this. Okay, so this is what a progressive tax rate system means. So if you are making, let's go with a single person. The first $9,950 that you make, you're going to pay 10% on that. From $99.51 to $40,000, you're going to make 12%. You're going to pay 12% taxes. So if you make $10,000, if you have $10,000 in taxable income, let's just say you're working part-time as a student, you have $10,000 in taxable income, you would pay 10% on the first $99.50, then you would pay 12% on the next $50 if you made $10,000. Now I'm talking about taxable income after all your deductions and everything. Then it goes to 22, 24, 32, 35. Here's a 37. So you have to be pretty high here before you get into the 30s. So most people are here, 22, 24. So what we mean by a progressive system is the more you make, the higher your tax rate. Okay. So the more you make, the more taxes you're going to pay, as opposed to a flat tax. Like in Europe, in England, Great Britain, and Europe, a lot of these countries have a flat tax of just like 50%. You just pay 50% to the government, 50% tax rate.
France had that happen, they had a riot.
Yeah.
Because of that, with Yellow Jackets.
Yeah. And so that's really seen, paying a flat tax is really seen as being unfair. So why do you think they think that's unfair? Everyone's paying the same rate.
Well, it's because of the immigrants. They're illegal immigrants that are just going around not having to pay for these.
Oh, yeah.
That
right.
was one of the issues.
That's one of the issues. But the reason why it's seen as a regressive tax, meaning unfair, that it unfairly discriminates against lower income people, because think of if we had a 50% tax rate. If I make it 100,000, I'm taking home 50 grand. I can live on that comfortably. But if I'm making 50,000, I'm only taking home 25,000. If I'm making 30, I'm only taking home 15. So it really does penalize. It's seen as being unfair for that reason. So, but anyway, this is what our tax rates. These are the actual tax rates for 2021. So the Trump administration, these all were reduced down around 4%. They're about 4% lower at each level than they used to be. And here's the, just while I'm in this page, let me show you. Here's the standard deduction, $12,550 if you're single, $25,000 if you're married. So if you're married and making less, than 25 grand, or if you're single and you're, let's say you're a student, you're single, you're making less than 12,500, should you file a tax return? Do you have to file a tax return if you're making less than that? No, you don't have to, but you should, because you just never know what can happen. Because I had a relative that I would do taxes for that is just works part-time, doesn't make much money. And so when Trump got elected, his income was under the 12.5. And so we just agreed, let's not bother to file a tax return. Did that for like 2 years. Well, then COVID happened. And the stimulus checks started coming out. Well, guess what they were using for the stimulus money? They're using your tax returns. And so I said, oh, well, we better file your taxes then because of the stimulus checks. So you can get the stimulus check. So I filed the current year, then I had to file 2 prior years, and it ended up costing like $30 a year to file these past years. So my point is, you never know what can happen. So it's a good idea just to keep filing, even if you don't have to pay, because of the, you can't predict the future. And people ended up getting stimulus money. This is the other thing I wanted to show you was this. So how are they using statistics to say that rich people pay less in taxes? It's the tax rate. Because if let's say that you are, let me go back here. Let's say let's say you're in this category, married, filing jointly. You're paying 24% here, you're paying 22. So if you're married and making 81,000 to 120, it's 172, in that amount, you're paying 22%, here you're paying 24, here you're paying 32. So these are, you're still kind of getting around, this is the upper middle class here. Now, compare that to somebody who's wealthy, who is the majority of their income is coming from stocks, from long-term capital gains. This is the most they're going to pay is 20%. You see, so it is a lower rate. And then if it's rental income, if it's passive income, it might not be anything on that because they can offset their expenses with it. Now, this is what the Biden administration wants to raise taxes. He says we're raising taxes. And the market went down and people were freaking out when he was talking about it about 6 months ago. But then they realized that it was stupid to do that because it's really inconsequential. He's talking about raising the capital gains rate. I think it's a really high rate to 40% or something crazy. But here's the deal. He's only going to raise it on people who have capital gains of $1 million, not income of $1 million. You actually have to have capital gains. You have to have made $1 million in the market or in real estate or whatever to be able to have that higher tax. So it's going to affect, they said it would affect like 1.2% of Americans or 1.5% of Americans. Not really a big deal at all. So anyway, that's kind of a summary on the taxes there. So we do have this progressive system. It is seen as being a fair situation. Okay. Okay, let's go to 19 and 20. Okay, let's take one more quick break and then we'll finish up. Let you stretch your legs, get a drink, go to the bathroom. Just let's take a 5-minute break for our last break for the night. And we'll go over the rest of it.
Well, I told you to get outside.
Hi, Isaac. This is Sherry Lawrence coming again. You can just call me back tonight after 9 if you're still working. I won't bother you again. Or give me a call tomorrow. Take care. Bye-bye. 985-640-2616. Sherry Lawrence.
You already like waiting.
Speaking of like this stimulus and everything, today at work, we were just, when I was searching work to do, and I was talking to one of my supervisors, and she told me about like this website where you can like track who got like these SBA loans and like these PPP loans. So I'm going through this list, and there are people that like I graduated high school with, who either went to college for a few years and dropped out, or they graduated and like have normal type of jobs, but then they filed these applications saying that they're a barber or they have a lawn service company, and basically saying that they file a Schedule C on their return and had all this income, like 20,000 in loans, and it's all fraud, because like I know these people, $20,000 in loans for something that they filed an application for when like they don't even have jobs. Like it's all
My daughter is like, and she got inside.
Yeah. So like, if you came to like our firm, like we obviously had to have all this stuff, and it was, I mean, the process was awful. But apparently, there's like these companies that will do it for you that are obviously fraudulent, and they're reporting these fraudulent things as your job, and it's you're self-employed. They're taking part of your loan. But yeah, these people like $20,000 in loans, like multiple that are, like I said, all fraud. Because like I know these people, and none of it's true. It's like, so the government can like cross-check. Oh, this person is saying that they're filing a Schedule C on their tax returns because they're a barber. Well, you couldn't have checked the tax return and said that that's not true.
That would take like 5 minutes.
And even that, but like a barber who's making enough money to claim a $20,000 PPP loan, that's red flag right there. Much less the fact that they didn't even file that return. So I'm like, the government just filed, like they just, sure, yeah, here's the
It's supposed to be for small businesses in this program.
yeah.
And all these companies were getting these loans, like, oh, I forget one of the restaurants in particular, I forget all of them. These name brand restaurants and all these large companies were getting these loans. Some of them were, there was such a public outcry, they gave the money back.
Yeah, and then some of them on the list that I know of who actually they went through the process and filed it the right way and was accurate, and they got like $2,000 or $8,000. So yes, those were accurate, and they got 2,000 or 8,000. And these people who were just straight out lying. $20,000. A 21-year-old doesn't work, isn't in school, getting a loan for 20,000. Like, oh my gosh, like that's crazy.
Well, it's just like the FEMA. But that FEMA's pretty strict. They'll come around. Actually, no, it's in the jail. Yeah, this guy. So he was staying. He was staying in a trail. He was in the car. He was staying in the trail on the property. of his friend. And they filed for FEMA as they should have. And he filed for FEMA using their address. So FEMA comes back. And it's a federal. And it- Like $3,500.
And then I'm sure on top of these loans, these same people are also filing unemployment. And we're getting the $600. So like, to me, when all this is happening, like, I just thought these people who aren't in school and aren't going to work are just filing, you know, unemployment and living off the sick. Like, I never even thought that these people were applying for these fake loan applications. So 20,000 plus a week without, like, oh my God, like, what? It's crazy. Like, it makes me mad, honestly, to think that, like, you know, but that's our government.
It's terrible. It's terrible that we don't have more oversight, you know.
Because like you said, that would literally take 2 seconds to go
Mhm.
across and check your tax return.
Right. Okay. Yeah, I thought it was tomorrow, actually. So, yeah, so the government may run, I thought it was October 1st, they might run out of money. Like, you know, at the end of the fiscal quarter here. So but it's happened before, it's nothing new. So when they run out of money, the government shuts down. This has actually happened to my son-in-law, because he works for the Army Corps of Engineers. This happened a few years ago. The government shut down for like 2 weeks because they couldn't pass. What they have to do is they have to raise the debt ceiling in order to be able to have money to fund these government agencies. And so he was still going to work, but it was like he was furloughed. And then they give them, once they get the money back, they pay these federal employees back, plus they give them their back pay. But some of the non-essential, I don't know if you guys remember this, it's been about 4 or 5 years. Some of the non-essential buildings shut down. It's a big mess. But if that happens, it's a buying opportunity in the stock market. The market will go down, but you know it won't last. So just buy some stocks. But yeah, that's been moved. So I didn't know that it was I'm not sure if it's the 18th. I thought it was like Friday or something. Oh, okay. Well, Twitter's probably just as good as the news. So, okay, let's talk about stimulus and taxes. Okay, so there's 2 ways, if we're going into a recession, or if the government they're concerned that we're heading into a recession. They were concerned about, they were trying to get us out of the recession back in 2007, 2009. When COVID hit, they were worried about a depression. So there's 2 ways there's some different ways to help try to stimulate the economy. And that is, they can lower taxes. Now this is, there's 2 types of policies. There's fiscal policy and there's monetary policy. In order to try to smooth out the ups and downs of the economy. So spending and taxes, that is fiscal policy. That's the federal government doing either increasing spending or lowering taxes to try to stimulate the economy. So, and to try to turn the economy around. And so that's what we're talking about here. There's two elements to stimulus: increase government spending or lowering taxes. So when I say increase government spending, I'm talking about increasing government spending. Well, they can pay a stimulus, they can create jobs, those kinds of things. infrastructure type projects, build roads and bridges, give us stimulus checks and so forth. Or they can lower the taxes. So stimulus causes the national deficit to grow, as we've seen, increases the national debt. The purpose of stimulus is to either prevent a recession or turn around a recession by expanding economic growth. Because if they give us this, well, I mean, when they gave us the stimulus money, what were we supposed to do with it?
Stimulate the economy.
Spend it, right? So most people went out and spent it. Some people paid bills with it. Some people invested it. They didn't really want us to pay bills with it, but people did a combination, because remember when I was telling you how we're coming out of COVID wealthier than we were before? One of the reasons is because we paid down debt. So some people spent some of the stimulus, but they paid down debt. Paying down debt doesn't stimulate the economy though. So the thing about stimulus is it doesn't really work if you pay off bills, if you pay bills. It only works if you go buy stuff or go on vacation and so forth. That stimulates the economy. And so it might not be as effective depending on people's behavior. So, let's see. So it's supposed to, it definitely stimulates the economy. But here's the problem. The problem with stimulus is that it's going to be met with higher taxes in the future. So we, by increasing all this debt, we're going to end up paying higher taxes in the future to fund this federal deficit. So I'm going to skip down to this before I come back up here. So if government spending continues to increase, eventually we're going to see this increase in taxes. And if their spending is financed with borrowing, that's going to eventually result in higher interest rates. So, and they have this thing called the crowding out effect, which basically says that if the government becomes a borrower, they're crowding out private investment. So there's a demand for capital, a demand for money, and the government crowds out private investment, and it causes interest rates to go up. So basically, when you think about how to stimulate the economy, stimulus, one-time stimulus or 2 and 3 times stimulus, or lowering taxes, what do you think would be more effective? If they just lowered our tax rate or gave us money? Yeah, because contrary to what they think in Washington, we're not stupid, okay? I know that if they lower my tax rate, I'm getting a permanent raise. That means I'm going to have more money this week, next year, the year after. I can change my behavior and increase my consumption for a long period of time. So lowering taxes, lowering the tax rate increases it helps the economy over a long period of time. A stimulus, if people spend the money, it gives kind of a jump start, gives a boost to the economy, but it's kind of like, I guess that's not a good analogy. I'm trying to use a drug analogy, but I won't go there. It's like a quick acting drug versus a long thing, So anyway, a stimulus is going to give a boost to the economy real quickly if people spend the money, but then it's over. And you've got this increased deficit. The better thing to do is a tax cut. So really, long-term stimulus is really only possible through a decrease in the marginal tax rates. These lump sum tax cuts don't work in the long run because the increased government spending eventually is going to be offset by a decrease by cuts in private spending because of that crowding out effect with the borrowing. But the main point of all this is just to remember the difference between giving people money, stimulus, versus the tax cuts. Tax cuts are more permanent and better in the long run. It's really going to be interesting, I think, to see how history looks at this whole mess we've done for the past 2 years. The whole COVID mess, which a lot of people say, a lot of scientists say the masks are totally ineffective. We've been having to wear them for almost 2 years now. The stimulus money, the unemployment, the repercussions on the economy. It's going to be interesting to see what, how it's looked at when all the dust settles. All right. Okay, that's 19 and 20. Oh, okay, another favorite subject of that, thanks to our government, is another mess, is Social Security. Okay, so what if I said Social Security is a Ponzi scheme? What does that mean? What's a Ponzi scheme? Colin?
Is that whenever you get a lot of people to pay for something, and there's usually like a small group of people that profit from it, and the rest just gets taken out of it?
Yeah, basically. So a Ponzi scheme is when you typically, well, this guy named Ponzi started the first Ponzi scheme. Turn of the last century, turn from 1800s to 1900s. And it was in stamps, like he was selling stamps. But this is the way a Ponzi scheme works. Let's say that I told you I could guarantee you a 20% return. You would give me your money, right? If I said I could guarantee you a 20% return, you'd probably give me your money. So I'd say it's going to cost you $10,000, and I'm going to guarantee you a 20% return. So let's just say 1,000. So there's 24 people in here. So you each give me $1,000, okay? And then I go to the next class and do the same thing. And every semester I'm doing this, okay? And I keep getting more and more people. Well, I'm not really making 20% because that's too good to be true, right? I'm paying you with the money from new investors. And so that's how a Ponzi scheme works. The old investors are getting their money from the new investors. And eventually it grows so big that you can't possibly have enough new investors to pay off the old investors. And then the Ponzi scheme just collapses. So that's what a Ponzi scheme is. And there's a new, I was watching the other weekend, I was watching this series, I think it was on Netflix, called, have you guys heard of those leggings called LuLaRay? What's it called? Not Lululemon. It's called, I had never heard of it. It's called LuLaRoe, I think. Yeah, LuLaRoe. Anyway, it's pretty interesting documentary if you are interested in watching it. It's kind of like Amway, Tupperware. These people were selling clothes, were selling leggings out of their house, and it really came about because of Facebook, the Facebook marketplace, and all this. And so the way it works is these women were recruited and they were selling clothes out of their house, but the bulk of their money wasn't being made in selling the clothes. They were getting a percentage of people they recruited. And so the people at the very top of this Ponzi scheme were making over 100, it's crazy. They were making over 100 grand on this because they were getting cuts from everybody else. The people down at the bottom weren't making very much money at all. So anyway, that's called, for you, those of you who are marketing majors, that's called a multi-level marketing company, MLM. So a multi-level marketing company where you recruit people, it's okay as long as the bulk of your money is coming from the sales of the product or service. When the bulk of the money is coming from recruiting other people, then it crosses the line to be a Ponzi scheme. So anyway, that's kind of interesting. Bernie Madoff, who just died, he basically was operating a Ponzi scheme because he was not really making money in his investments that he was promising. He was using new money to pay old money. So anyway, the reason people accuse the Social Security program of being a Ponzi scheme is because how are they paying for Social Security? With our dollars, right? So we're like the new people in the Ponzi scheme, and they're paying off the old people. But, I mean, it's not really a Ponzi scheme, but it's kind of, that's the analogy that people use. But really what the social security system is, it's a pay-as-you-go system. Okay, that means that they have a social security fund, but the people who are working are paying into social security, and the people who are retired are receiving the money from social security. But when social security was first developed in the 1930s, it was during the Depression, and it was really just to keep people out of the gutter. It was a safety net. But the expected, the mortality rates, the expected lifespan was around 65 years old at that time. So you get social security at like age 64 and you're dead within a year. Also, you had 5 people paying into the system for every one person who was getting it. Now it's down to like 3 to 1. Pretty soon it's going to be 2 to 1 and then 1 to 1. And we're living a lot longer too. Now they have increased the social security age, the normal retirement age to 67, but that still we're living much longer than we were, way back in the old days. So it's going to run out of money. So we have, they're expecting this fund. Right now they have money in the fund. They're expecting that to have a zero balance by 2034. So in 2034, that means all the money that's coming in is going to pay out. There's no surplus fund. So it's kind of a problem. Actually, Medicare is much worse, but Social Security is a problem too. So we need to fix Social Security. So what do you think about, here's some ways to fix Social Security. So what do you think about increasing the, you think we should do that? It's already been increased from 65 to 67. No, you don't think so?
I mean, right now we're in the boomer state, like boomers are retiring, so it's gonna continue to grow.
Yeah, it's the baby boomers' fault, part of it is, because there's this whole crush of people who are retired.
I mean, I just think by 65, like I mean, unless you want to continue working because you love your job or something, I mean, I don't know, by 65, you should be able to live your life and enjoy it.
Well, if you want to, well, here's the deal with Social Security. You can retire. No chalk here. Oh, here's some. Okay, so you can pick your ages here. So they did raise the age to 67. If you were born after 1960, which I think we all were, if you were born after 1960, the normal retirement age is 67. But you can begin taking benefits at age 62 if you want. It's going to be about a third less. Your benefits are about a third less if you take them at 62 than if you take it at 67. If you want, you can wait until you're 70. And then you get about a third more when you're age 70. So knowing how impatient most Americans are and how consumer oriented we are, what do you think most people do? Yeah, people take it at age 62. If you wait until you're 70 and you live to age 84, you've left about $100,000 on the table. In other words, if you took the money at 62 and died at age 84, you've gotten $100,000 less than a different person who waited until they were 70 and died at 84 because they got a much bigger check. So when should you take Social Security? What do you think? When would you take it? 62. Okay.
I mean, who's to say I'm gonna make it to 84?
Exactly.
I'd rather just start living now.
Yeah, so, so I guess it depends on your health, because you can make the decision anytime, I ran some numbers. If you take it at 70, you have to live to about age 78 to make it worth, that's like the break even. So, yeah, it's a gamble, So a lot of people just take it at age 62. But if I'm at 62, and if I'm in good health at age 62, I mean, you can still retire, you just don't take the benefits yet. But if I'm age 62 and I'm in good health, I might wait a while, at least till the normal retirement age, because my benefit will be a lot higher. When I get to here, I mean, you can take it at any time in between too. When I get to here, then I might wait. I might see what my health is like, and maybe wait, but probably not. You know, very few people wait for stuff. But it just, of course, it depends on your health. So by the time we get there, well, you guys are gonna get there a lot longer, far in the future than I will. Even by the time I get there, they might have raised this again. And the problem was, when they raised it to age 67, it really didn't save them that much money, because the majority of people are still taking it at age 62. So maybe they should raise this to 63 or something, that would help. So, but the problem with all this is, the longer the more years they go without doing anything, just the worse fiscal situation we're in, Social Security. All of this was around during President Bush's, the second Bush's first administration. And they were talking about this, and they were going to do something about it, and then 9/11 happened, and then it just kind of went out the window. So anyway, that's one fix, increasing the retirement age. Another fix is to increase the Social Security withholding tax for employees and employers. Does anybody know how much the deduction is? Have you ever calculated on your paycheck how much they're taking out?
7.65%.
Yeah, that's Social Security and Medicare.
6.2%.
Yeah, so it's depressing. It's downright depressing when you look at your paycheck. 6.2% is coming out of your paycheck going towards Social Security. And then the other 1.4 whatever percent is Medicare. That's what brings up 7.65.
Yeah.
It's to the 7.65. That's just the half of it. Your employer is paying the same amount. So think about that. Just the 12.4% of Social Security. If I had that to invest, I would definitely be a multi-millionaire by the time I was retired. So if we just had that money to invest on our own, we would, even the 6.2% would be much more money than I'm going to get in Social Security. Pretty much guarantee that, because it's an inefficient system. Also, this isn't in here, but another problem with Social Security is it's not just Social Security for old age as an old age pension. They have survivor benefits. If you're collecting Social Security and you have a minor child, they actually get Social Security too. So if you're 65 and you have a child under 18, they get a Social Security benefit until they're 18. The big problem with Social Security is the disability. The Social Security disability has gotten out of hand. We were talking at the break about the PPP loans and how there's all this fraud going on. There's these doctors and lawyers that are all in cahoots of getting people on Social Security disability. Because if you say that you have a back injury, a lot of these injuries are really hard to prove. You can't, I mean, you've got to take people's word for it. Back injury, PTSD, anxiety disorder, a lot of these things, they have these pet things that they pick. And so that's kind of gotten out of hand with the Social Security disability. Now, it isn't that much money. It's like $1,100 a month or something. But there's people out there who are completely satisfied to collect that money and not work. Anyway, so should we increase the Social Security withholding? Well, that's not popular because we're already paying 6.2%. So no one really wants that. You could increase the wage base for Social Security. What that means is it's around, I think it's around 130 or 137,000 this year. So that means that you're taxed on Social Security for the first $137,000 that you make, and then beyond that, if you make more than that, they don't take withholding out. So they could increase that. That's probably a possibility that most people would be happy with because it wouldn't affect them. They could means test it. What do you think about that? Giving wealthy people a reduced benefit or no benefit at all. So should we say, if you made it in life, if you're a millionaire, you're just not going to get Social Security? That's not popular because those people have paid in, right? It's not fair. So they say, no, we paid into it, we want it. And then the final one, that actually makes the most sense, which is privatizing it. So this was a really cool thing that they had in place that they were going to do. Of the 6.2% coming out of our checks, 4% of that, the actual 4%, if you were under, like, I don't know, 45 or 50 years old, I forget the actual age. But if you were close to Social Security, you couldn't do this. But if you were a certain age, you could divert 4% of that 6.2 and put it in an account in your name through the government. And the account was like a private account. And you could have picked you could pick like cash, bonds and stocks, or all a mutual fund. And so it was actually going to be in the stock market. And you could invest that money and make money on it. I thought that made the most sense because of course you're going to get a better return. And think about if all that money started going into the markets would go up. But then the market, the stock market went down. This was like I said, right before 9/11, which was in 2001. And then the market crashed because of the dot-com bubble. So it's just not popular. People think in Washington think it's too risky. So that you probably won't see that. But they're definitely going to have to do something. And so this will, anyway, this is just, that chapter is just kind of summarizing Social Security and some of the problems with it. All right, that was 21. Okay, when you read this chapter, this is talking about chapters 23, 22, and 23. They're talking about what the Fed did to during the whole 2007, 2009 problem with the home mortgage meltdown. And so we're gonna, I'll go over that in more detail next week because it's kind of a little bit long-winded. But let me just talk a little bit about the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve is not the federal government. You've got the federal government, you have the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve is an independent arm. And what used to happen, 1800s and in early 1900s, you'd have these financial panics and you would have these runs on banks. And so in order to eliminate these financial panics, where people would go and try to withdraw their money on the bank, and then the banks would go under, the Federal Reserve was established in 1913 to stave off these financial panics. And so basically what they do is they use monetary policy to try to keep the economy running smoothly. And they do this by manipulating interest rates. So if they want the economy, if they're afraid the economy is going to go into a recession or is in a recession, they'll lower interest rates. And the way they lower interest rates is by putting more money in the money supply, increasing the money supply. The way they increase the money supply is by buying bonds. So when you hear, oh, the Fed is going to reduce interest rates, they're going to lower interest rates by 1/4 point. The way they actually do that is they buy bonds. Because when they buy bonds, they're putting money they're buying the bonds, they're putting money into the money supply. When they say they're raising the interest rate, to raise the interest rate, they are selling bonds, keeping money out of the money supply. And when they raise the interest rates, they're trying to slow down the economy a little bit because they're worried about inflation. And so anyway, the Fed, when we had this whole recession, the Fed really, it really did prevent us from going into a depression because of some of the things that they did. And so we'll go, as I said, we're gonna do this, we'll do this next Monday because it's kind of long and it's late. But they did a lot of, read this beforehand, before we talk about it. And we'll be going over the homework too, but it tells you that all of the different things that the Fed did that kind of overstepped their bounds. They did a lot more during this last recession. So that's 23 and 22 and 23. Okay. Okay, so what does this mean? We're just gonna take a few more minutes through these last two chapters. So the FDIC has a limit on deposits of $250,000 per person. What is that? What is the FDIC insurance? Anybody know?
I say, I was like,
The bank runs out, or like,
Yeah,
it's like insurance.
right, it's to prevent a bank, it's basically to give us faith in the banks. Because the banks used to go under and people would lose all their money. People wouldn't put their money in a bank, they'd put it in under their mattress or in the walls of their house. So in order to have faith in the banking system, they developed this FDIC insurance, and it was insured, your money was insured up to 100,000. During the 2005, 2007 recession, they increased it to 250,000 because it was ridiculous. They had it at 100,000 forever, and it wasn't enough. Now it's at 250. So if you have your money in a financial institution, not a brokerage account now, but in a bank or credit union or savings and loan, your money is insured up to 250,000 per person, meaning if you have a joint account, 500,000. So if you have, as you get older and accumulate wealth, you don't want to have more than 500,000 per deposit if you're married, or 250 if you're single. But this created a moral hazard issue because now the banks, when they raised it to 250, the banks now know that our money, the money that we've given them, it's insured. The government's going to bail them out. It's insured for 250,000. So if they make all these risky decisions and go bankrupt, it's no skin off of their nose, so to speak. So it creates this risky behavior among banks because of this insurance, which we call a moral hazard. Okay, and then the last thing is, just think about this for next week. MasterCard and Visa. MasterCard and Visa is in the dark ages. Finally, they came up with these chips on our credit cards and debit cards. But they've been in the dark ages as far as security, whereas the criminals out there, they're into the technology. But Visa and MasterCard was way behind. So Google and Apple Pay have come out. Supposedly Apple Pay is like totally risk-free. You're not going to get your money stolen if you use Apple Pay. Google Pay is saying the same thing. So the question here is, do you think that Google Pay and Apple Pay are going to take over the traditional credit card companies? Are we all going to gravitate towards Google Pay and Apple Pay and not use Visa and MasterCard anymore? Think about that, and we'll talk about that next week. So, okay, so homework, problem set 3 and 4 is due next week. And so we'll discuss that, and then we're going to talk about the comments. And if we have time, we're going to go over the first couple of chapters in the other book. So if you have a chance, read the first 2 or 3 chapters. Have a good week.
Yeah, obviously, yeah, just solid. So I guess we're a few
Hang
weeks
on, let me
out.
stop this recording.
Sure.
Okay, go ahead.